I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be talking about Assassin's Creed Renaissance, written by Oliver Bowden, and I read the audiobook narrated by Gildart Jackson. This is a book based on the video game series Assassin's Creed, and I know nothing about that video game series, but I did see the movie with Michael Fassbender, and I really liked the idea of it, and the concept seemed really fun, so I thought I would try reading the book to kind of see more about the story without actually having to play the game. So I went into this book not really expecting a lot from it, because, you know, sometimes books based on movies or video games can be quite terrible, so I thought I'd just try it out and see if it was terrible or not. And the first part really caught my attention, and I was really pleased with it, and it set up this great foundation. But then it didn't really follow through, and it just kind of fell apart, and I was disappointed because it had so much potential, and it just didn't really live up to that. So I thought it was a great concept and a very fun world, but I feel like they didn't do everything they could have done with it. So this is really a fun action adventure. If you're looking for, like, heavy literature to make you think, do not read this book. This is just a fun adventure where the main character has all these incredible abilities and the villains are all really stupid. And you just kind of get to watch all the action unfold. And so this book is definitely very good at the action. So if that's what you're looking for, then you'll probably get it out of this. So this is pretty much historical fiction. There are some kind of mystical elements to it, but they could easily be explained as being just technological advances. So pretty much I'd say this was historical fiction. And all I know about from the movie is in the movie there was this huge like time travel sort of concept, and they didn't have that at all in this. So I don't know if that comes up later in the series or if the book series just isn't doing it, but a lot of the reason I wanted to read this was because that sounded like a really fun concept to me, and they just didn't have that. I listened to the audio version of this book, narrated by Gildart Jackson, and that just made the book for me, because I could tell that a lot of the writing was fairly cheesy and very, you know, young adult, typical, not very thought out, you know, kind of a B-roll sort of writing, but because the narrator delivered it so well, it was just amazing. He had this great voice, like he could narrate Tolkien books. It was this British accent that was very regal, very powerful, very deep, sounded like he was telling an old tale of battles lost and won, and it really made the book a bunch. It is set in Italy during the Renaissance, and the whole setting felt to me very much like kind of the setting of Romeo and Juliet. And all the names sounded very much like everything seemed like it could have just, all the characters could have just walked right out of Romeo and Juliet. I'm not sure when that is set exactly, I'd have to look it up. But this book is set during the late 1400s in the Italian Renaissance. So if you think you might want to read the book, then go read it. And now I'm going to talk about my spoiler-filled thoughts on the book. So with this great setting and everything, it felt like a place that I hadn't read much about before, except in Romeo and Juliet and things like that. And so it was very fun to see this world. So the main character was Ezio Auditore, and this was his story of becoming a member of the Order of Assassins and learning about their creed. It was fun to meet Ezio when we first started out. I believe he was 17. He doesn't actually, you have to kind of, age was a weird thing to follow, but I'm pretty sure he was 17 at the beginning. And he's running around with his brothers, you know, doing what boys do, jumping along rooftops and having midnight sword fights and climbing into girls' bedroom windows, as teenage boys do, and all this stuff. And you're like, okay, so this is the main character starting out. Then, you know, tragedy strikes. His family is arrested, and he has to climb up to the tower to save his family. And it's like, okay, and, you know, then he didn't manage to save them, so I figured, okay, this is going to be his motivation for the rest of the story. It's going to be kind of avenging them or learning from them or something like that. And so it starts to be like that, you know, he's going to protect his mother and sister and take them to his uncle's house. And, you know, first he has to learn from the prostitute woman who is going, you know, teaches him how to blend into a crowd and pick pockets so he can assassinate his father's killer and all that. And, you know, he has to do that. And then when he has his sister and his mother at his uncle's house, then he has to learn things from his uncle. And all of that was entertaining. You know, it felt like he was going to grow a little bit and learn some things, and I was excited to see what became of him. And then right about when he got to, he'd got his mother and sister to safety, he got to his uncles, he learned from that, he had assassinated the person who killed his father and brothers who he blamed for their deaths, and then the book just started going on and on and on, really repetitive. Like I said, the characters sounded like they could have been out of Romeo and Juliet, and they tended to blur together a bunch for me, because like, most of their names sounded really, really similar, and I'm not very familiar with Italian names, so I had a hard time picking those out. And then the characters had a lot of the same personality traits. You had kind of background characters who often died. You had hero characters. And so pretty much every good guy character he encountered was wise and knew all about the Assassin's Creed and was going to teach him about it. And they were very noble. And, like, I was expecting a little bit of uniqueness. Leonardo da Vinci was a little bit unique because he was the crazy artist and he was scatterbrained and his workshop was messy and he had fun ideas and he was gay. They didn't do much with it, but they, like, mentioned it in passing, which is better than nothing, I guess. And so he had, like, a slight little bit of actual character to him. All the other good guys were just this exact same person. Like, you could have swapped out any of their names. They could have all been the same person. They'd have these great names and great setups, and then they're exactly like every other person who Ezio had ever met. I was excited. There's, Machiavelli is in this, and I remember reading The Prince in high school, and it's quite devious and clearly written by someone very intelligent without a very strong moral compass. And so I thought, okay, Machiavelli will be an interesting character. But then it turns out he makes some comment about, oh, well, that prince over there is evil. One day I should write a book about him. Of course, I do not endorse evil things because I am a good guy. And I just was disappointed with that. So all the good guys were like that. And then all the villains were these caricatures of, like, just evil, mustache twirling, I'm evil and I know what I'm doing is evil and I am doing this for self-promotion. No one matters but me. And there was no complexity. There was no, oh, I think there might be a moral gray area here. I think I might be able to justify what I'm doing. It was just, I shall be evil. They knew what they were doing was completely wrong and they felt no remorse. But then very often when they died, they'd be like, I know that I've done wrong, and as to redeem my soul, I think I'll give you this crucial piece of information before I die. And so every single character who was evil knew he was evil, and they were all very much the same. The only one who was a little bit different was the monk at the end who took the apple from Ezio. And he was the only evil character who wasn't actually trying to be evil. He thought he was trying to save the world, and he was on, like, a religious mission and stuff, and he had just a little bit more depth and a more motivation than the other characters. So it was really nice to be able to tell him apart from the other evil guys, because for a long time, it seems like Ezio gets a name of some horrible person who needs to be killed, and he goes off and tries to find them and kill them, and he kills them, then he gets another evil person. And it really started blending together for me, and I lost interest, kind of. I kept waiting for it to get good and exciting again, because that first section of the book held my attention so well, and then this section was just really boring. And it was just, it didn't feel like it had much of a plot, and I could see this being a video game. I could see that as a video game, you're like, okay, we're gonna fight, and the fun thing is, like, poking the little buttons on the game and killing the guys. But as a book, there wasn't much happening and it didn't really hold my attention. So one of my biggest problems with this book is that it spans 28 years and Ezio barely changes at all. At the beginning, he learns some new fighting skills and things, but hearing Ezio talk when he's 17 versus, they say he's, I think, 44 at the end, it's not really any different. He doesn't have any different goals. He hasn't learned anything about himself or the world. He's really the same person at 17 that he is at 44, and that was another thing that made it feel slow, because he kept going along and doing the same thing, and he didn't really learn much of anything. And I didn't realize, I was listening along, and more than 10 hours into the book, he gets injured for the first time. So more than 10 hours into a 13-hour novel is the first time that he's, like, challenged in battle and loses, and he actually has an injury and he has to recover from it. And that made me like him so much more, because when he's just running along being amazing and superhuman and never getting injured, it's not very entertaining and it's pretty boring. So he definitely had superhuman powers. Even before he tried to learn anything, you know, he could just climb up sheer walls, you know. My dad's in prison. I think I'll climb up the tower and go say hi. Just, you know, he had all these crazy abilities and they just seemed to get better as time went on. And I thought it was really interesting. Every time he met someone new, they'd say, all right, I am going to test your skills by having you solve this problem that no one else has been able to solve and defeat these people who no one has been able to defeat. And it was never, oh gee, hello Ezio, I acknowledge that you're better than everyone else, because you clearly are in this universe. Would you please fix this problem for me? It was, oh, I know a lot more than you, and as part of your training, I will test you by assigning you this problem. And that happened quite a few times, and I just thought that was kind of weird that they did that. I also thought it was weird because the story was all told from Ezio's perspective. I felt like the author put him in a lot of situations where he was just sitting around and listening so that we, the audience, could hear. And he didn't really do anything. There would be all these times where he's sneaking around planning to assassinate someone, and he'll hear this conversation. And you kind of forget that Ezio's the one kind of telling the story. It's written in third person, but, you know, we're seeing it from his point of view. And he'd just be sitting there, like, in the walls or wherever he is hiding, and we're watching this whole thing happen. And it's like, okay, you have your little gun thing, you can throw knives, you could really easily just assassinate this person you're planning to assassinate. Your life would be so much easier. But it felt like he just sat there. Very often throughout the book, he'd just sit and watch stuff happen so that we, the audience, could see it. And then 5 minutes later, he decided to do something, because that was when he really should have shown up. But if he didn't show up until then, we couldn't have heard that crucial plot information. So I wasn't happy about that. So the pacing seemed really off in this book for me. Time flowed in a really weird way, and I had a hard time following it. It started off, you know, with the death of his father and brothers, and he came back and did all this stuff. And suddenly it mentioned that 2 years had gone past when he's back in the city. He sees Christina. It says, oh, 2 years have gone past. And I thought, wow, I did not get that that was 2 years. Months, definitely, maybe up to a year, but I didn't get that it was 2 years. And I thought, okay, so time's going by really fast in this book, so I'll try to pay attention to that. And he went off and had other adventures and did other things. And then he sees Christina again, and she says, it's been 8 years since I saw you last. And I did not get that at all. Like, time flew by, and there wasn't really any point where they said, and then time passed. Like, and he was planning to rob this place or something, but it didn't feel like years were going past, so I didn't feel that passage of time at all. So then I think a year goes by, and he turns 28, and it is 1487, I think, and he's, like, standing on a boat having a birthday. And then they made a mention of him being 30. And then all of a sudden it was 1494, and I guess he's about 35 now, and time just passed. Then it was 1497 when he was at the end and he was trying to get the apple back, and he's come into this city, and before, you know, when he tries to steal something, he can do it in basically a night if he wants to, but for some reason he sat around for a year waiting to steal the apple. And then, you know, all this time has gone by. He's like 36, I want to say. No, he's more than 36. He's getting up there. He's in his late 30s, I guess. And then, all of a sudden, they say, oh, 5 years passed, and adventures ensued. And I feel like they could have done that so much sooner. Like, you could have done that like a third of the way into the book and just said, time passed, adventures happened, and you wouldn't have really lost anything. So I don't know why they waited until the end to actually say, and now 5 years passed, because before, time was just flying by, and I didn't get it at all, and they never said anything like that. And then suddenly it ended in 1503, and I believe it said he was 44, and it had been 28 years, and I think that math kind of adds up, 28 years since he was like 17 or 18-ish. So then toward the end, like, it made sense a little bit, but I really had to pay attention to that, and, like, I have notes here, because I was writing down and trying to figure out how much time had gone by, and how old Ezio was, and what was happening, because I didn't get that just organically from the book. I really had to work to figure that out. So Ezio's relationship with women was really interesting in this book. At the beginning, it sounded like, he was like puppy love, in love with Christina, because they're both 17, But then he kind of seemed like he was in love with her throughout the whole book. So I don't know if it was supposed to be like, he loved Christina and only Christina, and that's why he never settled down. And it kept talking about how he wished he could have settled down with Christina, but he hadn't, because he had to carry out his father's legacy. But his father did settle down and have 4 kids. So I don't know why Ezio couldn't have settled down if he wanted to. That didn't really make sense to me. So then, I figured, Christina was the damsel in distress character, and then he met Rosa, and I really liked her. She was there for all the action. It seemed like she was going to introduce him to this new thieves guild, and then a romance developed, and it was so much fun. And as soon as the romance developed, and as soon as they became romantically involved, then she stopped being in anything. She stopped being in all the action scenes. Whenever he was talking to members of the Thieves Guild, she wasn't there. And it had seemed when we first met her like she was a really high-up member here, but she just kind of vanished. And I think there's a passing reference made to her once, and you barely see her for ages. And then he sees Christina again and starts making out with her. And I guess you can kind of say, well, she was his first love, and so it would make sense for him to see her and kiss her because he was so surprised. And I guess if he told Rosa about it right away, it was okay-ish. Maybe, because there was no mention of them breaking up, so I guess they're still together. And maybe he was just shocked to see Christina, and he's going to do the thing where he apologizes, and, it's not great, but it's okay-ish because I was going to tell her about it. And then Ezio does one of his spectacular things, and he goes off and has basically an orgy with the prostitute nuns, and there's 3 of them or more lead him back into a bedroom. And there's still no mention of Rosa or anything like that, so I figure she's just gone and he's single now and we missed it. But then pretty soon after that, he and Rosa are standing on his ship deck celebrating his birthday, and it's very clear that they're still together. And so I guess they're just not in a monogamous relationship, or they broke up and got back together. It's not talked about at all. And then it doesn't make any mention of him breaking up with her or anything when he leaves the city. And then he has a brief affair with Katerina, and at least that ends, you can hear them talking about, okay, we're not going to be seeing each other anymore because you're leaving. But Rosa just, trickled off, and you never saw anything, and that felt weird to me. I didn't know why they included that if they weren't going to finish it or talk about it. So a lot of things about the Order of Assassins didn't make very much sense to me. I didn't know where all the codex pages came from, but I was okay with that because I figured they might explain it later in this book or in another book in the series. I didn't quite understand their weapons. They were really cool, the switchblade that would shoot out of your wrist and stuff. But then they only had wrist things. So you had 2 wrists, and he could have a knife on each wrist or a knife and a gun on a wrist. And, the hidden gun thing was cool. But that was the only gun in the whole book, and it's a book about assassinating people. And so I didn't know why Ezio was the only one who had a gun. I didn't look up, I don't know when guns became widely used in Europe. But I want to know why, if they had the technology to make the fancy little wrist gun, they couldn't have all had guns, because it would have made their whole assassin job way easier, and I didn't know why no one else had one. Or especially, because they were new and it took a really long time to load them, why you wouldn't have had several, so that you could shoot several shots before you had to reload. So I did not get that. They made brief mentions of, he'd carry throwing knives or stuff, but it seemed like they came up with really cool inventions, and they could have come up with some that didn't attach to your wrist, or that you could attach several different kinds to your wrist at once. And it seemed weird that they would only use wrist things. Oh, another really weird thing is they would talk about the assassins wearing bracers. And it was this big cool thing, and people were always trying to attack Ezio, and their swords would just bounce off his wrist, and they would look at it like it was magic, because the sword didn't cut off his hand, or hurt his tendons, or I don't know what. And so, several questions about this. First of all, why were they always attacking people's wrists? I don't know anything about actual sword fighting or anything, but in pretty much every action movie I've seen and book I've read, they don't talk about stabbing wrists. And, you know, they'll say, oh, and then they stabbed him all different places. They don't talk about the wrists that much. I don't know why they were so wrist obsessed and why they thought they were going to fell him with a stroke to his wrist, but no, the bracer protected him. And I don't know why they were always aiming for the wrists. Unless, I mean, the only thing I could think of was maybe this is in the same universe as Star Wars, because people are always losing hands in Star Wars. But even then, they tend to lose them farther up, not always at the wrist. So I didn't know why they always aimed for the wrist. And then my second question, if it is this kind of a universe, where the way to kill someone is to cut their little wrist parts when they drop their sword, I guess. I don't know. If that is true in this world, then why doesn't everyone wear bracers? It's not that hard of a concept. It's bone here. You can't bend it. And if everyone's going to be hacking at it all the time, then why don't you put armor on it? And why would they be so surprised that someone was wearing armor? Whenever they tried to hurt Ezio and the armor of his bracer protected him, they looked at him like he had magical powers. And armor is a pretty basic thing. I don't know why this surprised them so much. And then just the order of assassins doesn't make all that much sense to me. There are a lot of things about it that are very weird. So first of all, everyone Ezio's ever met is in the Order of Assassins, basically. And the Order of Assassins' whole goal is to just do the opposite of whatever the Templars do. They don't really have that much of a mission statement, which, okay. And so, for some reason, they waited about 10 years to indoctrinate Ezio into the Order of Assassins. So I don't know why you would wait a decade when he is clearly the most talented human ever born. Why would you wait that long to let him be an official part of your group? I don't get that. Then the thing with the tattoos, it was kind of a cool thing, you know, oh, we used to have to cut our fingers off to use this weapon, and that was how we identified ourselves, and we decided not to do that. We're just going to do the tattoos now. But since every person Ezio has ever met has been in the Order of Assassins, why didn't he notice that? Why didn't he notice, hey, my dad and uncle both have tattoos on their fingers. How did that happen? Should I ask some questions? How come everyone I meet has these tattoos on their fingers? There was no mention of that. So if all the assassins have tattoos, why didn't he notice? Does everyone just wear gloves all the time and no one comments on it? I didn't get that. And then also at the end of his whole, when he was, you know, officially made a member of the Assassins, they all dove out the window onto a pile of hay. Or onto bales of hay. It was not a pile of hay, it was bales of hay. And I don't know if hay was baled more loosely back before it was so mechanized, but like a bale of hay is fairly hard. And I feel like jumping down onto a bale of hay from a height would have hurt a good bit. It sounded like they were pretty high up. And he didn't jump down onto it, he dived. So it seemed like you'd break, at the very least, your wrists and possibly your neck. Like, hay is not that squishy, especially when it's packed into bales like that. It wasn't floofed up to be like, you know, 6 feet of just super fluffed hay. It sounded like it was just like a little row of bales there that he was going to dive onto. I did not see how he didn't break some very important bones in that. And then I did not understand how the pieces of Eden worked. So there was the apple and the staff. And the apple at least makes sense, you know, that's part of the story of Eden. And then, so we know the apple is a piece of Eden, and then farther on someone mentions, oh, and the staff is the other piece of Eden. And Ezio says something like, oh, of course I should have known that. It's so obvious. Of course it would be the papal staff. And I'm thinking, maybe I haven't read the story in a while, I don't know, but I don't remember a whole lot of reference. Maybe the snake was like curled around the staff in the Garden of Eden. I don't know. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me why it was so obvious that the staff would be the other piece of Eden. And I didn't really get what they did, the staff or the apple, because they obviously had great power, and they like showed you these really cool visions that like messed with your mind. But it was a little hard to tell what you could actually do with them, other than just see cool visions of like the past and the future and stuff. And so I would have liked to know more about what they actually did. And so then the ending of the book was also a little weird to me, because we finally track down the Spaniard who we've been talking about for all this time, and he didn't really seem to be that big of a villain. He was pretty easily defeated. And so then Ezio finally managed to, put all the apple and the staff together and figure out how they were supposed to work. And it just gave him kind of a little mystic riddle of great and powerful things are to come. I am speaking through you, which I guess could have been maybe a reference to the whole time traveling, looking back in through someone else's body kind of a thing that I got from the movie that I would really like to see. But it was all very vague, and it was very unclear. Like, I know this is a series and the story goes on, but it was unclear to me. There was no cliffhanger. There was no, oh, you should definitely keep reading because this exciting thing is going to happen. It was all just kind of vague and ominous. Oh, so something I thought was hilarious was one of Ezio's first assassinations when he is trying to avenge the deaths of his father and brothers. And he's going to kill the guy who had them executed. And he walks up to the guy, and he's holding a knife to his throat, and he says, I am going to kill you. I am seeking revenge. Now, tell me where the important papers are. Which is really, really stupid, because if you want important papers, what you would say is, hi, tell me where the important papers are, or I'm going to kill you. It makes no sense to say, no matter what, I shall kill you, but you should tell me where the important papers are, just because. And that was hilarious. And the only thing more stupid than what Ezio did was what the guy responded. And he's like, because, he has this knife to his throat, and he says, and he knows that he's going to be dead in like 20 seconds. And he says, I have outsmarted you. You won't get the papers because I keep them on my person at all times. And someone just threatened to kill you, and they want the documents you have. And now you've told them, oh, you won't even have to look anywhere. Just kill me and take them off my body. It'll be so easy. And I just thought that whole exchange was hilarious because both of the people involved were so stupid, and that was just quite funny. I think my favorite part of the whole book was the scene when Ezio meets Caterina, and she's with her husband and being obnoxious and awful. I liked it that she actually had a personality. She was one of the only people who had a real personality in this book. And her husband puts her on a gondola and just shoves her out to the river with nobody there. And she's screaming and cursing and horrified. And Ezio goes and jumps in and tows her back. But I love that because it was one of the only times we had a character who actually had personality. So I really liked the kind of setting and tone of this book. And I think the idea has a lot of great potential. The book started out pretty interesting, if quite cheesy, but then just kind of degraded from there. And it got pretty boring after a while, and I'm kind of still intrigued. I have a little bit of hope that it could get better, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to spend my time reading along until that happens, so I don't know if I'll read more of the series or not. If I do, it won't be anytime soon. So that's what I thought of this book.